Welcome. Today, we're going to explore a fascinating topic. Was Jesus a real person, or is he just a figure created by early Christians to support their beliefs? Some people doubt his existence, claiming the New Testament is biased and unreliable. They argue there's no solid evidence for Jesus outside of the Bible. But what if I told you that historians from Jesus' time, even those who weren't Christians, wrote about him? One such historian is Flavius Josephus, a Jewish writer from the 1st century. His works provide intriguing insights into the life and legacy of Jesus. Flavius Josephus was born in Jerusalem around 37 CE, just a few years after Jesus' crucifixion. He came from a prominent Jewish priestly family and received a thorough education in Jewish law and Greek philosophy. Josephus's life took a dramatic turn during the Jewish-Roman War, which lasted from 66 to 70 CE. Initially, he fought against the Romans, but after being captured, he switched sides and became an ally of the Roman Empire. The Roman commander Vespasian spared his life because of his intelligence, and Josephus went on to become a historian under Roman patronage. His most well-known works are The Jewish War, which details the conflict between the Jews and Romans, and Jewish Antiquities, a comprehensive history of the Jewish people, published around 93 CE. In Jewish Antiquities, Josephus makes two references to Jesus, which have been the subject of much debate over the centuries. Some argue these references were altered by Christian writers later on to support their beliefs. While it's true that some texts were edited over time to promote specific religious views, there is strong evidence that at least some of what Josephus wrote about Jesus is authentic. Scholars have carefully examined these passages and have found reasons to believe they reflect what Josephus originally wrote, even if later changes were made. One of the most widely accepted references to Jesus is found in Jewish Antiquities, Book 20, Chapter 9, Section 1. In this passage, Josephus describes an event involving Ananias, the high priest, who gathers the Sanhedrin, a Jewish council of judges, to deal with James, the brother of Jesus, who is called the Christ. James and a few others are accused of breaking Jewish law and are sentenced to be stoned. This passage is significant for several reasons. First, it confirms that Jesus was a real historical figure. Josephus mentions him directly, calling him Jesus, who is called the Christ. Second, it supports the New Testament story that Jesus had a brother named James, who was an important leader in the early Christian community. Finally, the passage is written in a neutral tone. If it had been edited by a Christian scribe, they might have added praise for Jesus, such as calling him the Son of God. But Josephus doesn't do that. He simply presents the facts, which makes the passage seem more authentic. Most scholars believe this part of the text is genuine because it matches Josephus's typical style and the historical context of the time. The second reference to Jesus, known as the Testimonium Flavianum, appears in Jewish Antiquities, Book 18, Chapter 3, Section 3. This passage is much longer and contains more detailed descriptions of Jesus' life and death, which has led to much debate. It reads, "At this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if he can be considered a man at all, for he was a doer of marvelous acts and a teacher of those who received the truth with gladness. He gained the support of a large number of Jews and Greeks. He was the Messiah. When Pilate, upon hearing that the chief men among us had condemned him to the cross, sentenced him to be crucified. But those who had loved him at first did not cease to follow him, for he appeared to them alive again on the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and many other wonderful things about him. And the tribe of Christians, so named after him, has not disappeared to this day." This passage is controversial because it describes Jesus in a way that aligns closely with Christian beliefs, mentioning his miracles, his death by crucifixion, and his resurrection. Some scholars believe that parts of this passage were added or altered by later Christian editors to emphasize Jesus' divinity and miraculous powers. However, many scholars think that the core of the passage is authentic and that Josephus originally wrote something similar, even if later Christian writers may have embellished certain parts. Despite the possible changes, the passage still gives us a glimpse of how Jesus was viewed by some people outside the early Christian community. What makes Josephus's references to Jesus especially significant is that they come from a non-Christian source. While the New Testament provides the most detailed account of Jesus' life, the writings of Josephus show us how Jesus was viewed by others at the time. Even though there's still some debate about the exact wording and authenticity of these passages, Josephus's works are an important historical resource for confirming that Jesus was a real person who had a significant impact on the people around him. So, even with some debate over the exact details, Josephus's references to Jesus are crucial pieces of evidence in the historical puzzle of Jesus' existence. They help us understand how he was perceived by non-Christians during his time and offer valuable context for the rise of early Christianity. Whether you're a believer or just interested in history, Josephus's writings provide an important historical perspective on the life of Jesus. At first glance, the passage might seem like a strong affirmation of Jesus' divine nature. However, a closer look reveals that many scholars believe certain parts of it were likely added later by Christian scribes. This theory arises because of the context in which the text was written. Josephus, the Jewish historian credited with this account, was a devout follower of Judaism and worked under Roman patronage. As a result, it's highly unlikely that he would have written such overtly Christian statements about Jesus. On the other hand, most scholars agree that the core of the passage, a brief reference to Jesus, was likely penned by Josephus himself. Let's explore in detail what scholars believe was added to the text by later Christian editors, and what parts probably came directly from Josephus's own hand. One of the key reasons scholars suggest that parts of the text were altered is because of certain phrases that seem very much aligned with Christian beliefs, but out of place for someone like Josephus. For example, expressions like, "If one can even call him a man, he was the Messiah, and on the third day he appeared to them, come to life again," seem inconsistent with Josephus's Jewish background. These phrases reflect the Christian understanding of Jesus' nature, including the belief in his divinity and resurrection, doctrines that Josephus, as a Jew, would not have subscribed to. These parts of the text are generally considered later Christian additions. However, if we strip away these theological embellishments, what remains is still an important historical account of Jesus. Josephus describes Jesus as a wise man, someone known for performing remarkable deeds and imparting teachings that resonated deeply with people. His following wasn't confined to Jews alone. He attracted a diverse group of adherents, both from Jewish and Gentile communities. His ability to capture the hearts and minds of people was undeniable, and his influence spread quickly. According to Josephus, Jesus' popularity and teachings led to his eventual arrest and crucifixion by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, after certain Jewish leaders accused him of blasphemy. Josephus's account ends with a nod to the continued existence of Jesus' followers, the Christians, who are still present by the time he wrote his work. This version of the passage aligns much more closely with Josephus's typical style of writing. It focuses on Jesus as a historical figure without making any claims about his divinity or resurrection. Josephus doesn't label Jesus the Messiah, nor does he describe any miraculous events like the resurrection. Instead, he presents Jesus as a significant figure who was known for his wisdom, his extraordinary acts, and the impact he had on those around him. While Josephus doesn't affirm Christian doctrine, he clearly acknowledges that Jesus was a central figure who had a lasting influence, and whose followers were growing in number even after his death. Josephus's Jewish Antiquities was written to explain Jewish history and culture to a Roman audience. By the time he composed it, Christianity was no longer a tiny sect. It had spread across the Roman Empire and attracted followers from all backgrounds. Christianity had grown significantly, and its impact was beginning to be felt far beyond the borders of Judea. Josephus, as a historian, would have been keen to mention this movement in his work, especially since it was gaining so much attention. It's important to note that Josephus didn't only mention Jesus in his writings. He also referred to other prominent figures in Jewish history, including John the Baptist and James, who was the brother of Jesus. In his Jewish Antiquities, Josephus consistently highlights key figures and events that played a role in shaping Jewish history and culture. His brief reference to Jesus fits into this larger narrative of documenting influential individuals and movements in Jewish society. While his account of Jesus is brief, it shows that Josephus recognized the movement surrounding Jesus as an important part of the history he was chronicling. Some critics have questioned why more ancient historians didn't mention Jesus, given how significant his life and teachings were to later generations. This line of thinking assumes that a figure of Jesus' importance should have been widely recorded by all contemporary historians. However, this view overlooks the historical context. When Jesus lived, Judea was a small and relatively insignificant region within the sprawling Roman Empire. Jesus was one of many itinerant preachers in the area, and his message would have been seen as just another religious movement in a corner of the empire. To Roman historians of the time, Jesus may not have seemed noteworthy enough to merit detailed attention. It wasn't until decades after his death, when Christianity began to spread and gain momentum, that historians like Tacitus and Suetonius started paying attention to the movement. By the time Josephus wrote the Jewish Antiquities, Christianity had grown substantially and had become impossible for even the Romans to ignore. This is why it makes sense that Josephus, writing around 60 years after Jesus' death, would include a reference to Jesus in his historical work. It wasn't a mention of a divine figure, but rather of a historical one whose movement had grown significantly by that point in time. The writings of Josephus provide crucial independent evidence for the existence of Jesus as a historical figure. Even when we remove the parts that are likely Christian additions, Josephus's account still aligns with key facts that we know about Jesus. He was recognized as a teacher who performed extraordinary deeds, attracted a following from both Jews and Gentiles, and was ultimately sentenced to death by Pontius Pilate. After his death, the movement he inspired continued to grow, with his followers, the Christians, spreading his teachings further. These details align well with the accounts of Jesus' life found in the New Testament, and they help debunk the idea that Jesus was merely a myth. Josephus's perspective is especially valuable because he was not a Christian. As a Jewish historian, he had no reason to promote the Christian faith. His account of Jesus is therefore seen by many scholars as a neutral, external confirmation of the core elements of Jesus' life and legacy. While Josephus didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah, his writings still provide an important historical perspective on the man whose teachings would eventually give rise to one of the world's largest religions. The debate over which specific phrases in Josephus's writings are authentic and which were added by Christian editors is likely to continue. However, one thing remains clear: Jesus was not a fictional character. The evidence from Josephus, along with other historical sources, shows that Jesus was a real person who lived, taught, and left a lasting impact on the world. His life and ministry were significant enough to be mentioned by a prominent Jewish historian decades after his death. The writings of Josephus offer us a fascinating window into the early days of Christianity and the life of its founder. If you found this exploration of Josephus's writings on Jesus thought-provoking, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We regularly produce content that blends historical inquiry with religious studies, offering insights into the past and its enduring influence on the present. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to engaging with you in our future videos.